Hello everybody and welcome along to the Race Anywhere YouTube channel. Now the big news this week, of course, has to be the Willy Wonka experience in Glasgow. But the second biggest piece of news is that iRacing has finally released its Tempest rain system. Now the plan for today's video is to cover three main areas. Using my real life racing experience, is the rain on iRacing realistic? Secondly, is it fun? Because of course that's going to be one of the most important, if not the most important elements of this. Are people going to want to play it over a long period of time? And thirdly, I want to offer you some tips and tricks as to how to get the most out of your wet weather driving. So this is genuinely the first session I have fired up. You can hear the rain. Do we have any wet setups? Yes, we've got baseline wet, so I'm going to go with that just to get a start here. Should probably explain I'm driving the Toyota GR86 for this first session at Brands Hatch. The reason being, a lot of my real world experience comes from the likes of Mazda MX-5s, and the GR86 is probably the closest thing to an MX-5 that has wet weather enabled so far. I also went Brands Indy because that was the circuit where I first learned all about how good wet lines can be, and I'm going to come on to all of that because we're going to talk about all of these things in this video. After this session in the GR86, I'm going to jump in the Formula 4 car because I also have some experience on slicks and on wet tyres in the wet in a single seater, so we'll see how that compares as well. Okay then, here we go. Now I'm on the second wettest preset. It's a static circuit because the first thing I want to experiment with is what sort of difference it makes going off of the racing line onto more of a wet line. Okie dokie. Now I'm going to turn off ABS and traction control as well, just to get a proper feel for this. Already the rain is smashing off the windscreen. We can see standing water. Whoa, there's aquaplaning. Okay, that's a good start. Now I'm going to be comparing this throughout this video to some of the other sims and games that I've driven in wet weather on. And straight away, this puts me in a real car. I've done 3 corners and yeah, it's a good start. You've just instantly got that feeling of helplessness as you hit the puddles. Now, my plan is, to start off, I'm going to just try and take some normal dry racing lines and see what sort of lap times I set. And then once I'm comfortable, I'm going to then move off towards some wet lines and explain to you how all of that works and why it should make a difference. I just want to see what sort of difference it makes and to what extent. Lots of standing water in the inside, Paddock Hill Bend. Oh, same puddle as last time. Skating straight off. This is very wet, and it's not even the highest setting. For this test, I'm going to be better off trying it in slightly less wet conditions. I'm going to take it down a notch, I think, because at the moment there's so much standing water that it's more of a question of avoiding the big puddles in survival. I want to test something a bit different. I'll come back to this. Okay, down one notch. Let's see how we are. Looks like there's still a fair amount of standing water. Still a big puddle on the exit. That's exactly the same as there was in the higher setting. But we will persevere. So you've heard everyone banging on about wet lines, but you might be wondering what that actually means. Well, basically, to put it simply, rubber in a tyre has oil in it. Now, when a track is rubbered in, the racing line basically gathers lots of rubber from the tyres. When the rain comes onto it and it starts breaking up, basically a lot of the oil is extracted from that rubber. And then there's more rubber on the racing line, therefore there's more oil on the racing line, which when mixed with water creates, well, an ice rink. So the reason people drive away from the racing line when it gets very wet is because obviously there's a lot less rubber outside of the racing line. Now in reality, it has a very, very big impact, bigger than you might think. And another thing that some people don't really mention is the fact that it's not just the racing line that has rubber on it. Usually just left, just right of the racing line as well, where cars maybe go for overtakes and stuff, also usually has a layer of rubber down. So what you'll find is the most grip will quite often come from the very edges of the circuit. Now I'm currently trying to take a dry racing line, struggling with it, lots of difficulty under braking, lots of understeer, but I'm going to do it for the experiment. We'll see what lap times we can get. This actually feels okay. I think the standing water and the puddles are making a much bigger impact than just a general lack of grip on the wetter surface. It's amazing how much grip you can actually get from certain wet racing tyres. It's incredible in these low-powered, lightweight cars. Okay, that's going to be a decent lap then, following dry lines, and it's going to be pretty much a 1 minute 1 dead. So let's see what happens if I now start using the sort of lines I would use in real life around Brands Hatch in the wet. Straight away, okay, there's a puddle at the bottom, but look, 3/10 in turn 1. I didn't quite go as wide as I wanted to, but I still went fairly wide. We'll do the same up here. Didn't really gain much on the outside there, but look at the exit. So much better. Now I'm going to brake off of the racing line, whoa, into here, and that's not gone as planned. I've actually hit my apex, which I didn't want to do. And look how much that hurts us. Oh, grass. It's gonna take a little bit of getting used to. Okay, I touched the white line, and you saw what it did to me there. That's another tick for the realism question. I'll never forget 2016, I was racing at Brands Hatch in Single Make MX5 series, and the reigning champion came in for a one-off appearance, and he was my teammate, and I was fighting for the championship at the time. Soaking wet qualifying session, and he overtook me around the outside and just basically showed me how to do it. It was only my second year of circuit racing, I hadn't quite mastered the wet, and I realised just how wide he was actually going. He was running all the way up to the white line, hugging the edge of the circuit, and I started doing it. I think I was down in the mid-pack or maybe in the top 5, but nowhere near the actual front of the grid. And then all of a sudden, the last 5 minutes in qualifying, by trying what he was doing, I put it on pole position. And since that moment, I've always known the power of experimenting. Try different lines, try different things, search for the grip in the wet, and you will find lots of time. Half a second up at the moment. Do a cut across the main racing line there, get a good exit. Just slightly off the racing line here, not a massive difference because the camber makes such a big difference, but there you see it. 1.3 up on our fastest lap using the proper dry racing line, and we're going to be in the 59s here. 59.6, there we go. So from what I'm feeling so far, I'm going to give it a big tick for realism in these conditions. It's always a balancing act. You've got standing water to think about, you've got general grip levels to think about. Every single circuit is different as well, so there's some tracks where you will want to be basically hanging on the outside for every corner, and then there's other circuits where you don't want to be doing that. There's certain corners are different as well, depending on the camber, depending on where the water collects, depending on just general lines, whether it's an overtaking spot or not. There's so many variables, so it's very difficult to give like a generalized view, but what I will say is based on my racing experience at Brands Hatch, in the wet, in a car of similar power, rear-wheel drive, no aids, this is pretty good. Like, really good, actually. I think I'm going to move on now to trying the Formula 4 car, because I want to see how single-seaters feel, and then we can talk about a few more aspects, because there's so much terrain. It's not just about the grip level or standing water, it's about how it changes, develops, how the actual racing line dries, or whether a separate line dries. And all of this is going to become very clear over time. I don't think I'm going to be able to answer all these questions on just a first impressions video. But hopefully we'll get an idea of what it's like. And also, I mean, you could definitely have some fun with this. I'm actually going to start off with a dry setup on the car and dry tyres, just to see how it goes, because I have driven a single-seater on slicks before in damp conditions. I've set it to damp, by the way, so I've taken the rain down another step. It's meant to be very damp, but it looks like it's properly wet, which is interesting. Right, Oulton Park. But this is a car that's similar performance to something I've driven before, so let's just see how the overall feel is here. And straight away, whoop, there we go. Greasy surface. Now, hopefully there's not as much standing water with the weather set as it is now. Oh, a bit of a lock up there. Just going to feel the car, feed the power in. Yes. No. It was going so well. Everything's fine. Now you might notice I'm pushing fairly hard straight out the pit lane. Couple of reasons, and this, I guess, comes into the tips category. One, driving in the wet is all about feel. You need confidence, you need to know what the car's doing underneath you, and sometimes you do just need to go out there and push a little bit, because if you drive within yourself too much, you begin to just lose all feeling and faith in the car. You need to know where the grip level's at. So by pushing quite hard, you feel the lockups, you feel the understeer. I would actually recommend inducing understeer deliberately, just so you can try and gauge where you're at. Now obviously, you're going to have different levels at different parts of the circuit, whether you're online or offline. But generally speaking, I think it's always a good thing to go out the pits in the wet. Look at that lockup. Oh, I can't slow down. That's so realistic. The grass has more grip than it should do, I would say. If you are in this situation, you do just want to keep the tyres warm, especially on a drying circuit if you're going from wets to slicks. I cannot stop this thing from locking up. That's incredible. I can't explain how familiar that feeling is. It's not in a good way either. I'm seeing the spray in my mirror and I'm seeing a car behind me that's probably on wets. I cannot slow down for the corners. Instant lockup. I'm barely touching the brake pedal. You can see my inputs at the bottom left actually. Bearing in mind, that was on the racing line. Let's just see what happens on the slick tyres when I go away from the racing line, under brakes and into the corners, just to see if the performance is better. Okay, I'm going to stay wide here, into the chicane. Oh look, no lockup, and more braking power used there. Straight away on wet tyres, I'm loving the feel. A bit of confidence out the box. I can brake. I've got a black flag for unsafe pit exit, but we're going to ignore that for now. Look how much grip I've got though. And I'm just going to stick to the outside lines, ease the power back on. And even though I've not driven this car on this sim, and I've not driven in the wet, because I've kind of experienced this in reality, I can basically apply real life thinking to this, and immediately it's giving me real life feeling back. Now some other notes on the realism side of things. Aquaplaning, I've experienced quite a lot of it already, and that is a very familiar feeling. The force feedback through the direct drive steering wheel I'm using really does give you a proper sense of aquaplaning. And something else I wanted to mention, Emily Jones had an early version of this rain to try out. She did a video on the Overtake channel, which I recommend checking out. It's really good. But she's also got some real-life racing experience, and she talked about something called the silence. Now, I thought this was a great description because it's so accurate. When you start braking for a corner, you hit a puddle, and you just don't hear anything. You hear no engine note, tyres are completely locked up. It's such a familiar, terrifying experience in a real car, and iRacing actually simulates that incredibly well. Like, that feeling when I was locking up earlier and everything just goes a bit quiet, super realistic, super terrifying, and trust me, you're all going to experience that at some point. Of the three key things I was going to cover in this video, the one I haven't really mentioned much is just fun, but I don't know if I need to, you can probably see it. I am thoroughly enjoying myself. Just trying to extract the performance out of this, trying to judge where the grip levels are, and this is on a static track of course. It gets even more exciting in a proper race. When everyone's searching for the grip, things are changing lap by lap. It's just thoroughly enjoyable. So when the track's drying up, when it's been wet and it's getting drier, it's not just about taking wet lines, because at some point there's going to be a crossover, and whatever surface or whatever part of the surface is being used the most, driven over the most, will dry, and eventually the dry line will become grippier than the bit that doesn't have the oily rubber on it. But trying to find that crossover point is so tricky, and that's why you've just got to keep experimenting, keep looking for the grip. If someone's faster than you, watch what they do when they overtake you, and actually just try and follow them, because you'll be amazed. Oh, no. Oh, for goodness sake, I'm terrible. Right, a 6-lap race. I'm going to keep the relative lap timer on, and I'm starting from the back of the grid. Now, I don't know how good or bad the AI are. I've set them to a range between like 105 and 110, but I don't race enough AI on iRacing to actually know what level I'm at, so we'll have to wait and see. However, I want to see how the spray is, I want to see how this baseline setup feels, and just generally give you my final thoughts, I guess, from this first impressions video. I also want to make some comparisons with other sims, because I've not really talked about them so much. The best examples of rain in sims so far have to come from ACC, because, I mean, it's really competitive in an esports sense. It definitely livens up the races. It's realistically implemented. There are lots of things to do really well, but I'd say overall, it just lacks a little bit of realism and finesse. It's like, it's very good in sections, and, you know, there's more grip off the racing line, for example, but it's just not quite the detailed level that you'd be looking for. It's like lots of Newton meters without so much of the fidelity, if you know what I mean. Right, turn 1. I'm going to aim for the outside. There's our first move. Bit of contact, we'll ignore that. And you can see the spray. I mean, this is even on a damp circuit rather than a fully wet circuit, and there is a lot of that spray. Difficult to see, and that's perfectly realistic. Just trying to find any space I can, and I'm struggling. Look at this. So you actually end up finding yourself pulling out of the spray just to be able to see, basically. Oh, car spinning up in front. Oh, that's a big shunt. That could have been a lot worse, to be fair. That's nice to see. Some understeer and then a bit of an incident. We're going to try and sneak down the inside. You can see the car in front sliding on the wet. I'm sliding on the wet. I'm spinning on the wet. Now, R Factor 2 also does wet weather, and it does it reasonably well. It basically changes the grip level between the racing line and off of the racing line, so it's not necessarily realistic, but from a sim racing sense it works quite well. You know, you have to be careful when you make moves that you don't lose the back end if you go off the racing line. The general grip level and feeling is pretty good, it's just not really simulating a realistic dynamic weather, you know, different parts of the surface, for example. Again, it's quite rudimentary. Then you've got Gran Turismo 7, which I think's a superb example of wet weather in racing. I think the only thing wrong with the Gran Turismo system is the fact that it's on Gran Turismo 7, so it needs to be a little bit more accessible and playable than some of the more hardcore sim racing titles, because they do, I mean, graphically, a great job of simulating the weather. They do a great job of showing a drying circuit and accelerated weather changes, stuff like that. It's honestly really, really good if you've not tried Gran Turismo 7 and its wet weather system, but it doesn't feel like you're really racing a real car in the wet, and that's more to do with the game itself rather than the implementation. This does. This just does. And I'm not, you know, a crazy iRacing fanatic, someone who only plays iRacing or thinks iRacing's the best sim out there. That's not me. That was lucky. I think this just proves that when developers take the time to get their systems right and to get things as good as they can be rather than rushing them out, people are happy. Like, okay, everyone's been wanting rain for a couple of years and they've been teasing it and it's been delayed and everything, but now that it's come and it's good, or it seems to be good, people seem to be really chuffed with it from what I've seen. Obviously it's very early days, but they can only get better, and I think it's just a lesson out there, you know, don't throw out something when it's not ready just for the sake of it, because sim racing is a place where people have patience to a degree. You know, everyone's got racing to do, everyone's got things to be filling their time with, and when you come out with something good, you want it to be good, you want it to move things forward. I'm breaking on the racing line and I shouldn't be, and I'm really glad that iRacing have kind of held off and just optimised things. I feel like I should also give AMS2 and Project Cars 2 a bit of a shout out as well, because their wet weather is superb, but mainly for the visuals and the aquaplaning and puddle experience rather than the realistic driving experience, because yes, you do, you know, get the really cool changeable dynamic weather in those games, and it is cool to look at and fun to drive in, but it just doesn't give you that same feeling of genuine grip change on the rubber which you get in real life. Now, if you think my wet weather driving's been fairly disappointing and is not really teaching you anything, I recommend going and watching the British touring cars from 1998 at Donington and watching Nigel Mansell and his Mondeo. That is well worth it. Also Max Verstappen, Brazil 2016. That's good wet weather driving. See, the AI are actually taking a pretty wide line through there. They're all following a wet line, which is really cool to see. There we go, fastest lap. That's something. Look at them all on the wet line. Now are they going to go, oh, I'm blocked up, No, grass. Get back on. That's nice.
Still there, hold your line. Clear on the left.
Just exposing my lack of talent. It actually looks like the dry line is kind of appearing off the racing line. So where the AI are going on the outside of the circuit, it looks like a darker shade. The cars that are going on around the circuit influence what line dries as it should, rather than, you know, the game just assuming what the dry line's going to be. Very interesting to see how all of this plays out in a real race against real people rather than the AI, though. And I think lots of people are going to try that early on. I don't know if many people are going to enjoy racing in the rain that often in the long term, because it's another variable. It takes away, you know, the ability to practice in a static condition. There are lots of reasons why people might not want to, you know, race in the rain beyond this week. The novelty wears off, but I still think it's a hugely influential thing on the service, because you look at top level esports and top split races, endurance races with your friends, for example, and special events. I think their rain is going to really shine. My one other concern is those who enjoy racing in the wet are going to get very, very good at it, therefore enjoy racing in the wet more and do it more often, and those that don't are going to do it less often and therefore not get better at it, and you're going to find this kind of big split between wet weather specialists and people that just avoid it altogether. That could definitely happen. Although it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think if you want to be a successful iRacing driver, you've got to kind of cover all grounds, right? Finally, yet again caught up with the pack that I keep throwing myself away from.
Still there.
So much confidence off the racing line under braking. Gonna squeeze the orange one out.
You're in the middle. 3 wide. Clear. Right side. Clear on the right. Left side. Clear.
Yeah.
Got wheel damage.
Tell you what though, we're gonna finish in a better position than we started, which means this has been a highly successful race. And as we come to a stop on the pit straight, I can hear the rain pattering off the top of my helmet. Again, just well done to the developers for giving you something that most people just cannot experience unless you've been able to have the privilege of racing a car around a race circuit, because it genuinely does give you such a strong, authentic feeling. Just a couple of final quick tips for you before I head off. First of all, you'll have noticed me using the relative split delta lap timer throughout this video, and I highly recommend in the wet weather using this to your advantage. You're going to learn so much about how you can gain time, where you're going to lose time, what different lines do, so just abuse the fact that you can use it. And the final tip for driving in the wet applies to both this and real life. Relax and enjoy it. Honestly, if you tense up, if you don't enjoy driving in the wet, you're going to struggle to feel the car. You're going to basically be gripping the wheel too tightly, and it's going to slow you down, I promise you. If you just try and relax, try and have a bit of fun with it, as I say, go in confident, go in wanting to throw the car around and get sideways, you're going to have a blast, and it's also going to make you quicker and more consistent. It's also going to make you better at finding the grip on the circuit, so have fun, go out there and just chuck your car around. Obviously, just do a better job of it than I did. Hopefully you've enjoyed this little introduction to Rain and iRacing. Very good first impressions from me, but I want to hear what your first impressions are in the comments below, so do let us know. Make sure you subscribe to the Race Anywhere channel as well if you want more sim racing content like this in the future, and also lots of sim racing content that's nothing like this. I hope you all have a fun week splashing around in the puddles, but until I see you next time, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye. Weekend to forget for John Munro at Oulton Park Circuit. The challenge was too much for John Munro, who limped home in 17th place. Come on. Looks like you're just going to have to throw all of my tips in the bin.